Right, let's start this journey. And you've made the initial contact with the franchisor, either at a show or through an advertisement or whatever. So these are not legal things, but just things to bear in mind. How responsive is the franchisor? Because if it takes the franchisor 2 or 3 weeks to respond, is that a good sign? No. Equally, how heavy is the franchisor? Is he constantly phoning you and saying, come on, let's progress this? And then that, in my view, is also not a good sign. If the franchisor is new, has he pilot tested? Because remember, franchising is not about franchising, licensing a great idea. It's about licensing something that the franchisor has proven works. And the only way a new franchisor can do that is by pilot testing. Now, during this process, do you get the sense the franchisor is choosy? Do you get the sense the franchisor is really looking hard at you to say, is this the sort of person that we want as a franchisee? Because if you don't get that impression, and the opposite impression is created, whereby the franchisor you sense will take you on if you've got a pulse and a checkbook, you need to think very long and hard. And also try to find out during this period whether the banks support this particular franchise. Right, so you've made the contact, things are looking good. Undoubtedly, the franchisor will ask you to fill in an application form. Now, be very careful with that application form that you fill it in accurately, because increasingly in franchise agreements, I see clauses that say that the franchisee has not provided any false information. And if you have, that would give a franchisor the right to take action against you. So make sure everything in that application form is accurate. And bear in mind, the franchisor is going to want to know about your creditworthiness. Things are still going well and you're still talking to the franchisor and the franchisor is still talking to you. So the franchisor at some stage is going to be giving you some very confidential information that he really doesn't want any of his competitors to have. And so it is likely that the franchisor will ask you to sign a confidentiality agreement. That should be a very short and simple agreement that should be very easy to understand. It imposes obligations on you not to misuse any of the information that's being provided to you if you decide not to go ahead, not to sort of start your own franchise using all of the confidential information that's been provided. And that's perfectly understandable and perfectly reasonable. It will last for so long as the confidential information is confidential. Something to look out for. Some franchisors not only impose a confidentiality obligation not to use the confidential information, but also impose a non-compete obligation, which would prevent you from being involved in any similar business for a period of time, normally about a year. So look out for that as well. Right, things are still going really well. And the franchisor, or indeed you, might suggest some sort of a deposit agreement. From a franchisor's perspective, the franchisor says to himself often at this stage, is this guy serious? And I want to make sure that he is serious because otherwise I'm wasting a lot of my time with him. And so franchisors very often say, pay a deposit. So very understandable. Equally, from your perspective, you might say, well, actually, I've got a job. It's going to take me a bit of time to serve my notice, but I'm really keen on this franchise, so I want to reserve a territory. So those are the two situations where a deposit agreement arises, and it can be for your benefit. Make very certain that the deposit is refundable if you decide not to go ahead. The British Franchise Association's position is that it ought to be refundable, but the franchisor has the right to deduct all external expenses that it incurs in looking for property for you or assisting you in any other way. So, deposit agreement signed. Now, I'm going to talk about some danger signs that you need to look out for in the process with the franchisor. Hard sell and time constraints are things that really make me angry. There should be no hard sell. It's too important. Franchising is too important. You're going to invest a vast amount of your life and savings in it. You don't want to be hard sold to. And if a franchisor says, look, you've got to sign up really quickly because the next training session is starting in a week's time, and then the next one after that won't take place for another 6 months, be concerned. Take your time. If it's a new franchisor, you're taking a bigger risk than with an established franchisor with 100 franchisees, all of whom are successful. Now, I'm not saying don't take a franchise with a new franchisor. All franchisors have got to start somewhere, but be aware you're taking a bigger risk. Thirdly, if the franchisor makes some statements to you and says something like, oh, don't worry what's in the agreement. Between you and I, the position is this. Don't buy that, because there'll be a sneaky little provision in the franchise agreement that says if it isn't in the franchise agreement, the franchisor hasn't agreed to it. Fourth point, which I've already mentioned, is no pilot testing. If it's a new franchisor, you've really got to establish that the franchisor has created a viable business, and you can only do that with pilot testing. Fifth point, who are the franchisor's advisors? Has he used a well-known consultant? Has he used a well-known franchise lawyer? Or has he used one of these ridiculously cheap and generally useless internet consultants or internet agreements? They don't generally work, and if the franchisors try to save money doing that, that should be a warning sign. Next, ask the franchisor how many failures, how many terminations have there been of franchise agreements, because that will tell you a lot about the failure rate. Actually, ask for terminations, not for failures, because franchisors' view of what is a failure may not be yours, so you want to know all of the numbers of terminations. Get a full list of the franchisor's franchisees, not the 2 or 3 that the franchisor wants you to talk to because they're going to say nice things about the franchisor. A full list, and try to speak to as many of them as you can. Next, is the franchisor a member of the BFA? I am not saying that all good franchisors are members and it's only bad members who are not, but it would be a very odd thing for a franchisor not to seek to be a member of the BFA. So find out why if they're not. Read the agreement, have a look at the agreement. Does it strike you as a poor agreement? We'll come on to some of the guidelines that you need to think about. And then lastly, curiously you might think, if the franchisor is very keen to change the agreement to modify things to suit you, that's not normally a sign of a confident franchisor. Now, sometimes that happens at the beginning of the franchising process, but too much willingness to change the agreement, in my view, is not a good thing.